So a few months ago, this would be like back in January, I didn't go to the Sundance Film Festival. I normally go every year. The year that I didn't go, it seemed to be kind of interesting from my perspective. There were these weird things happening, and the thing that I thought was the most strange of all was this idea that Chris Rock was going to be in a movie with this French lady named Julie Delpy. The movie is called 2 Days in New York or something like that. And I thought, oh, well, I mean, clearly it's going to be some sort of racial antagonism comedy between, this crazy French woman who thinks she's the, French Woody Allen and Chris Rock, who is one of our foremost sort of social commentators in the area of stand-up comedy. And where's my clock, by the way? Oh, I see it. Okay. And I saw this, and I thought it was going to it would be some sort of, racial conflict situation. And it turned out that that was not the case at all. It was sort of the opposite. It was a Julie Delpy romantic comedy in which these two people are in a relationship. And the record skipped in my brain. I didn't know what corner we had turned. We're like, Chris Rock and Julie Delpy will star in the same movie as people in love with each other. And I thought, oh, that's great. That's, we've entered into some new moment, and that's interesting. And I thought about something else that I had noticed a couple weeks before that, in which, not weeks, maybe a couple months before that, where these guys in the NBA were beginning to take this David Stern imposed dress code, which I had, initially when it was brought down in 2005, just found really problematic. Like, the NBA is going to tell these athletes that they can't wear sweatshirts and they can't wear Timberlands and they can't wear jerseys because, that would, we have to sort of uphold the dignity of the league. And it was interesting to me that rather than, for a while those guys wore suits. They just wore boring, plain, uninteresting suits. And gradually, in about 2010, I noticed that Dwayne Wade and LeBron James and this guy Kevin Durant, who plays for the Thunder, they had all sort of started to take this dress code and do something interesting with it, which was they were exploring fashion in a way that was shocking to me. I mean, they were dressing like nerds. They were basically becoming the guys that I would have assumed they would have been beating up in high school, guys like me. And I just, between the Chris Rock thing and, I mean, I don't know if I'm making this Chris Rock point clear enough. Like, it's Chris Rock. And I don't know if you've seen Julie Delpy. She's the lady in the Ethan Hawke movie. They walk around Paris and just talk for 90 minutes. And I mean, it's like two universes basically colliding at the same time. But it's the thing that's interesting about that collision is that it seems to be emptied of fraughtness. I mean, it's not about how black Chris Rock is and how white she is. And this new, mellower Chris Rock that I found really interesting. And I just asked myself, between what was going on in the NBA and what was going on with Chris Rock, what else is happening? And so I just started to think about the fact that these things have happened in the last, within the last 4 years. And while it would be insane to think that President Obama is, he's not casting Chris Rock in these movies. And he had nothing to do with the NBA dress code, and I'm sure there are people who, on the other side of Barack Obama, who are like, well, he'd like to be in those places. He wants the government casting Chris Rock in movies, but that has not happened yet, so we don't have to worry about it for now. But I mean, I was just sort of thinking, what else? There's something is going on. So I was, in the last year, I realized that one of my favorite movie franchises, if we can have a favorite movie franchise, is the Fast and the Furious movies with these people who steal cars, basically. The movies are now in their 5th installment, and they've been through all these different iterations of plot and casting. But the thing that struck me about the first one struck me about the 5th one, which is that they look more like America to me than any other movie that gets made in Hollywood. And it's not about, more normally when a Hollywood movie sort of makes a movie about people of color or with people of color, it's about like how of color they are. Oh my God, these brown people, I feel bad for them. I have to, give them a home. I have to give them an education. I have to give them an Oscar. I just sort of feel like the thing that's exciting about those Fast Five movies is that they just come from this very organic place that does not call attention to how multiracial everybody is and how of mixed race everybody is. I mean, ultimately, if you really think about it, it's sort of depressing. They're like a bunch of people of color with this white guy who comes and infiltrates their group, loves it so much he stays, and then by the fifth movie, he's just sort of part of the sort of racial wallpaper that's been dominated now by these two. Well, that's not the depressing part. The depressing part is all these people are stealing cars. Okay, so we set aside the moral problem, and now we're going to celebrate the thing that the moral problem allows us to notice, which is that by the fifth movie, your heroes are, or your protagonist and antagonist, but in the most mild of ways, are Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, who is he's of mixed race, and this other guy, Vin Diesel, who is of, aggressively indeterminate race. He just doesn't want to talk about it. You can notice it, but, please don't give me a hard time. I'm just like you, except not really. I'm huge and have a bald head, and I used to be a bouncer. But anyway, these two guys are basically the sort of the leaders of either end of the law and the outlaws. And that struck me as really interesting. You've given over an entire movie franchise to these two guys who would seem to have something at least racially in common with the leader of the free world. And this sort of a ridiculous comparison, and yet at the same time, what you also notice is that in these movies not being about how mixed race these two guys are, it's really just about a cop trying to catch a car thief, and all his, Asian and Hispanic and black and other mixed race buddies. It begins to answer a lot of questions about the temperament of our president and like what else he's doing that people sort of might have a problem with. Why isn't the president mad enough? Why isn't he talking about being black more? Why isn't he doing more to help black people? And that sort of thing. And I think that what's interesting about this moment we're in is that there's, our president is African American, but he's also white. And so we have this really interesting moment where all of these formerly oppressed or the agency to have this change is now becoming more apparent. It struck me that it didn't remind me, but it evoked this very specific thing in a Flannery O'Connor story that I read. I've read it many times, but you might be familiar with it. It's Everything That Rises Must Converge, story she wrote in a collection that came out in 1965. It's a beautiful story. I'll read part of it to you now because it's fascinating. Its timelessness is fascinating. It's basically the story of a woman who, I'm going to be very concise here. A mother and son take a bus ride in civil rights era South. So at this point, the mother has a horrible hat. She wants to know if she should take it off. And the son says, he's just annoyed with her. He resents her, mostly because she's kind of a racist and also because she's kind of kooky. But he resents that he can't really bring himself to hate her because she's ultimately his mother and she's a good mother. She's just, socially backwards. And he is of another generation and he can kind of see where things are going and just resents that his mother can't quite see them with him. So here they are on their way to get on the bus so she can go to take her weight reduction class, or which I guess is what they called it in 1965. So here we go. Julian thought he could have stood his lot better if she had been selfish, if she had been an old hag who drank and screamed at him. He walked along, saturated in depression, as if in the midst of his martyrdom, he had lost his faith. Catching sight of his long, hopeless, irritated face, she stopped suddenly with a grief-stricken look, pulled back on his arm. "Wait on me," she said. "I'm going back to the house and take this thing off, and tomorrow I'm going to return it. This is the hat. I was out of my head. I can't pay the gas bill. I can pay the gas bill with that $7.50. He caught her arm in a vicious grip. "You are not going to take it back," he said. "I like it." My accent is not Southern. Just I hope you don't mind that at all. "Well," she said, I think I ought. "Shut up and enjoy it," he muttered, more depressed than ever. "With the world in the mess it's in," she said, "it's a wonder we can stop and enjoy anything. I tell you, the bottom rail is on the top." Julian sighed. "Of course," she said, "if you know who you are, you can go anywhere." She said this every time he took her to the reducing class. Most of them in it are not our kind of people," she said, "but I can be gracious to anybody. I know who I am." "They don't give a damn for your graciousness," Julian said savagely. "Knowing who you are is good for one generation only. You haven't the foggiest idea where you stand now or who you are." She stopped and allowed her eyes to flash at him. "I most certainly do know who I am," she said, "and if you don't know who you are, I'm ashamed of you." "Oh, hell," Julian said. "Your great-grandfather was a former governor of this state," she said. "Your grandfather was a prosperous landowner. Your grandmother was a god-high." "Will you look around you," he said tensely, "and see where you are now?" And he swept his arm jerkily out to indicate the neighborhood, which the growing darkness at least made look less dingy. "You remain what you are," she said. "Your great-grandfather had a plantation and 200 slaves." "There are no more slaves," he said irritably. "They were better off when they were," she said. He groaned to see that she was off that topic. She was off on that topic. She rolled onto it every few days like a train on an open track. He knew every stop, every junction, every swamp along the way, and knew the exact point at which the conclusion would roll majestically into the station. It's ridiculous. It's simply not realistic. They should rise, yes, but on their own side of the fence. "Let's skip it," Julian said. "The ones I feel sorry for," she said, "are the ones that are half white. They're tragic. Will you skip it?" Suddenly we were half white. Suppose we were half white. We would certainly have mixed feelings. "I have mixed feelings now," he groaned. So, 65, it's now 2012. I mean, it seems like, not to be, acutely optimistic, but I mean, it seems that this prophecy has sort of come to pass, this thing that the son knew was happening, and just wished his mother would die so that it would just happen already, is now seeming to come to pass in a really interesting way. And I think that the way that we talk about the president and what he should be doing and can't be doing does not quite take into account the idea that he might be playing what people often call, when he sort of sleeps at a first debate, some sort of long game. He might be doing the same thing in terms of how he handles race. He is what I would say part of a generation of prominent African Americans who are also of mixed race. And I'm just going to go into something that I wrote on the subject. I mean, but before I read that, I just would say that, like, for decades we've been watching white people sort of obsessed with black culture, and sort of thinking about what that would mean, like Elvis Presley and Mick Jagger and some suburban white kids, and this sort of influence that rap music and hip hop culture has had in the suburbs, and all the stress that it's caused some white parents because, oh my God. But now we see in this much more subtle way this idea that white culture, for whatever it is, and for everything that it is now sort of quietly permeated black culture without really calling attention to that permeation. Some of this is the direct result of the fact that a lot of black people are also white people. Some of this is the direct result of the fact that we're much more comfortable as an integrated society and are open to the influences of just being around other people. But I also think that, there's a generation of black people and of white people who sort of, they need to see in Obama this idea that they've held on to. And I think that, if you take that relationship between these two people in that Flannery O'Connor story and you sort of move it to now, I think there is a sort of generational frustration with this idea that because, the president has a bully pulpit to sort of express a kind of dissatisfaction or anger, and he's not using it to do that, that he's a disappointment. So I would say that, at this point, I think we're past James Baldwin's seething recriminations and maybe Amiri Baraka's calls for racial insurgency. There's no collective will to start a riot. And you can argue that maybe there should be, given other things that are wrong with this country, socioeconomically and even racially. But in one sense, Barack Obama has put Black American culture on its best behavior. It's at a new place of cultural, historical, and personal ultrasensitivity, where at every upheaval, every book, every song, every exchange provokes an almost involuntary need to peacefully critique and process and synthesize. The recriminations can wait. These Black writers, artists, and musicians are taking this moment to reassess Blackness. And some of these people would include some very prominent poets and playwrights and musicians. They're standing before this monolith of Black cultural identity and trying to carve out a shape they understand. So when people lament the president's passiveness on the subject of race, they're barking up the wrong tree, maybe. He's an emblem of a quiet, more contemplative, introspective Blackness. And introspection is now a superpower that he can harness. We might still need a public enemy, a Dave Chappelle or a Amiri Baraka, but that we don't have one at the moment is telling. Let's put it this way right now. Chris Rock is starring in this movie with Julie Delpy, and Jimmy Fallon's house band is The Roots. Everything has risen and has converged. And I think that it's just a really interesting moment to be observing these things and to be a part of popular culture, to be looking at popular culture in this way and noticing the ways in which it's changed and how that change is sort of being very quietly guided around our perceptions of this one man who we don't give enough credit for being as complex as he is. We don't give this, crazy, super wacky, crime-fighting, car-stealing movie franchise enough credit for being as bad as it is, also really pretty good. So that's it. Thank you.